Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The morning arrived cloaked in a shroud of mist, draping the makeshift shack by the roadside in a quiet, mournful haze. The air was sharp, biting at the edges of the tattered tarp that served as a roof, its frayed ends trembling in the wind like the last breaths of a fading hope. Nuong sat there, a still figure beside the bamboo bed, her eyes hollowed by the weight of a night without rest. Since the sun had dipped below the horizon, she had kept her vigil over Anh Chung, the man whose presence tethered her to something resembling life amid the chaos of their existence. His breath had been uneven through the night, a fragile rhythm she clung to, as if it were the only proof that they still had time. A sudden cough tore through the silence, harsh and unrelenting, pulling her from the edge of a restless dream. She leaned forward, her hand trembling as it brushed his forehead. The fever had eased, its cruel grip loosening at last. Relief washed over her, soft and fleeting, and a faint smile curved her dry, cracked lips, an offering of gratitude to whatever force had spared him this time. Anh Chung stirred, his eyes fluttering open, clouded with exhaustion yet sharp with awareness. He saw her there, a quiet sentinel, and reached for the thin blanket, folding it with deliberate care. His voice, rough as the wind outside, broke the stillness. "You didn't sleep all night, did you?" She met his gaze, her smile tender yet shadowed with an ache she couldn't name. "I stayed here to watch over you. I slept a little." He didn't reply, but the flicker of guilt in his eyes spoke louder than words. He knew the toll this life took on her, though he could offer no reprieve. Then a small sound pierced the quiet, a faint growl from her stomach, a reminder of the hunger they both carried like a second skin. He rose, steady despite the weakness lingering in his bones, and picked up the chipped knife from the corner. She watched him, worry creasing her brow. "Where are you going with that knife?" He turned to her, his face softening with a smile that held more warmth than the dawn outside. "To the forest. I'll dig up some cassava for us. You're hungry, aren't you?" She opened her mouth to protest, to beg him to rest, but the words dissolved as he stepped out, his silhouette fading into the gray-green blur of the trees. Alone now, she knelt by the ashes of last night's fire, coaxing the embers back to life with trembling hands. The flames sputtered, then caught, casting a frail glow that danced against the cold. She stared into the flickering light, her thoughts a tangled weave of gratitude and despair. Anh Chung, even in his sickness, thought of her first. Always her. But what was she to him, she wondered? A burden, a shadow trailing his every step. This life they shared, so brittle and worn, felt like a thread stretched taut, ready to snap. Time passed, marked only by the crackle of the fire and the distant rustle of leaves. When Anh Chung returned, he carried a large bunch of cassava, its roots still clinging to clumps of red earth. A small triumph over their endless want. But as the shack came into view, his steps faltered. The fragile structure tilted drunkenly, its poles broken and strewn like fallen soldiers. Nuong sat amid the ruin, her slight frame hunched, her shoulders quaking with silent sobs. The cassava slipped from his hands, forgotten, as he ran to her, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness born of fear and love. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Her voice came in halting gasps, choked with tears. "Two strangers had passed by," she said. "Men with cruel tongues and careless hands. They had mocked her, their laughter a blade against her dignity, then tore at the shack before vanishing into the morning." Anh Chung listened, his chest tightening with a fury he couldn't unleash, a helplessness that gnawed at his soul. He held her closer, his own tears falling now, warm against her cheek, mingling with hers in a shared mourning. Two souls, battered and small in the vast indifference of the world, finding solace only in each other's trembling embrace. They gathered what little they had, the blanket, the mat, the remnants of their fragile shelter, and turned away from the wreckage. The sun hung low, its light weak and pale, as they wandered until they found an empty patch of ground. Without a word, they spread the mat, claiming it as their new refuge. The fire was gone, its warmth a memory, but in the quiet between them, a stubborn spark of endurance flickered still. Life had bruised them, bent them, yet here they stood, together, unbroken. The day stretched on, heavy with the weight of survival. Anh Chung sat for a moment on the mat, his hands idle but his mind restless. The patch of bare earth beneath them offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of their rootlessness. He stood abruptly, his gaze hardening with resolve. "I'm going to find work," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness etched into his frame. "Stay here, rest a little." Nuong watched him go, her eyes tracing the curve of his back as it receded into the distance. A pang stirred in her chest, part admiration, part helplessness. She knew the toll this life exacted from him, the way it carved lines into his face and bent his shoulders. Yet he pressed on for her, for them. She remained on the mat, the silence pressing against her like a living thing. Her thoughts turned inward, sharp and accusing. He toiled for their hunger, their shelter, while she sat here useless. The realization gnawed at her, a quiet shame that urged her to her feet. She couldn't lean on him forever, not like this. Anh Chung reached a construction site, its skeleton of beams and bricks rising against the sky. He approached the foreman, his voice low but firm, asking for work. They pointed him to a pile of bricks, and soon he was lifting them, one by one, stacking them against his shoulder. The weight pressed into his bones, each step a testament to his will. Sweat beaded on his brow, mingling with the dust that clung to his skin, but he didn't falter. This was more than labor, it was a promise, a silent vow to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, Nuong wandered the road, her legs heavy with fatigue. She paused by the wayside, the sun harsh against her neck, when a sudden clatter drew her gaze. A woman on a bicycle had fallen, her basket spilling fruit across the dirt. Without a thought, Nuong rushed to her side, helping her up with gentle hands. The woman smiled, gratitude softening her features, and insisted she come along. "Come to my house," she said. "Let me thank you." They walked together, their steps falling into an easy rhythm, and soon arrived at a modest home nestled among trees. Inside, the woman cooked rice, the steam curling upward like a fragile hope. She urged Nuong to stay, setting a bowl before her. Over the meal, their conversation deepened. The woman asked about her life, and Nuong, her guard softened by kindness, let the words spill out. She spoke of days steeped in hardship, of loss that hollowed her, and of Anh Chung, the steady light in her shadowed world. Her voice trembled, raw with the weight of it all, and when she finished, the woman's eyes glistened. She reached out, pulling Nuong into an embrace that felt like shelter. "You poor thing," she whispered. "Stay with me. You don't have to suffer alone." The woman led her to a small hut behind the house, its walls weathered but sturdy. "It's yours if you want it," she said. Nuong's heart leapt, a rush of joy and disbelief flooding her. She hurried back to the patch of earth, her steps light with purpose. Anh Chung returned at dusk, his body aching from the day's toil, his eyes scanning the empty mat with rising panic. Where was she? Before the fear could take root, she appeared, her face alight with a rare brightness. "Anh, I found us a new place," she exclaimed, tugging at his hand. Together they gathered their belongings, the blanket, the mat, the fragments of their life, and followed her to the hut. It stood simple and unadorned, but to them it was a palace. That night they lay side by side beneath its roof, the air cool and still. Above, the sky unfurled a tapestry of stars, their light piercing the dark like tiny promises. Nuong rested her head against Anh Chung's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. He turned to her, his hand finding hers, and in that touch was a quiet understanding. They had little, almost nothing, but they had each other. For the first time in too long, a fragile happiness settled over them, warm and tentative. The world outside remained vast and unforgiving, its trials lurking beyond the horizon. Yet here, in this borrowed shelter, beneath a sky that seemed to watch over them, they dared to believe they could endure. Life had tested them, stripped them bare, but it hadn't broken them, not yet. And as the stars glimmered above, they held on to that flicker of hope, knowing it was enough for now.